Na 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 na.
Hey YouTube, my name is Vin. I like to play games, and welcome back to another episode of Vin Plays Yahoo Fantasy Football. This is my Week 13 recap show, where I go over how well my team did, my general thoughts on any of the games I watched over the weekend, and who I'm targeting for the waiver wire this week. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Congratulations, guys. High fives all around. We all made it to the fantasy playoffs here. Fantasy playoffs starting this week, week 14. And thankfully, I can say that I am going to be part of the playoffs. But let's go ahead and jump into my standings here. After this week's victory, if you can tell up top there, I ended up pulling out the victory 169 to 124 over Rated R Superstar. But not only did I pull out this victory for this week, but we are the number one seed now. Von like Donkey Kong ended up losing an upset victory for Christian Mingle over Von like Donkey Kong on the back of Lamar Jackson's big night last night against the Dallas Cowboys. But Von like Donkey Kong ended up losing, so since I own the tiebreak in points, I ended up shooting up to the number one spot. Hooray for us. Very exciting to hold that number one seed and get the bye for this coming week to start the playoffs. But the drafted also ended up losing this week as well, so we pulled a little bit further ahead from him as far as the standings are concerned. So let's go ahead and jump into our actual matchups here, starting off with our quarterback position. Aaron Rodgers, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind about Aaron Rodgers anymore, particularly since his matchups going forward are going to be really good. But against the Philadelphia Eagles, they do have a decent defense, but that team is spiraling straight down the drain. Carson Wentz, he looked absolutely awful again. He ended up getting benched for Jalen Hurd during the middle of this game. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. Oh, actually, that is here nor there because their offense put their defense in really compromising positions as well. And Aaron Rodgers took advantage of that. Aaron Rodgers is clicking on all cylinders. He had a fantastic game, 295 passing yards plus 3 touchdowns. Philly looked totally demoralized until actually Jalen Hurd came into the game. Jalen Hurd actually gave them a little bit of a spark. But yeah, it wasn't enough to overcome, wasn't nearly enough anyways, to overcome the Packers and Aaron Rodgers. Going over to my opponent's side, Kirk Cousins, I didn't really hear too much about this game, but he did have a good matchup against Jacksonville, I believe, and 305 passing yards and 3 touchdowns as well. So between Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins just has, like, his wide receiver core is top notch. I imagine that it's probably second only to, well, you know, the Tampa Bay receiving core is pretty good as well with all of their wide receivers, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown. But Kirk Cousins with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, it's right up there with those guys. With the Steelers, the Steelers have a good wide receiver core, and of course the Seattle wide receiver core as well with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But Kirk Cousins did not disappoint Rated R Superstar. He put up a ton of points as well. Going over to our wide receiver core, Davante Adams, yeah, there's no doubt about Davante Adams again this year. He's proven it time and time again this week over week. He just puts up the points. He had a fantastic game. He was shadowed by Darius Slay. Darius Slay did play, but it didn't matter because Davante Adams was lighting him up. And you know, that might not have been entirely his fault. He was coming back from an injury, so he probably wasn't 100%. That being said, though, even if he was 100%, Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers are playing so well, I don't think it would have mattered anyways. Davante Adams with 12 targets, 10 receptions, 121 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Davante Adams, he will be, you know, if we advance during the playoffs and even throughout the regular season, he is a big reason that we've had the success that we've had this year, and hopefully will have, knock on wood, going through the fantasy playoffs. Going over to our second wide receiver, we did end up starting Allen Robinson, probably a little bit to our detriment. We did have Robert Woods, if you remember from my last video. Robert Woods was in my starter spot to begin with, but I ended up going with Allen Robinson because Allen Robinson was cleared to play. But it was a little bit disappointing for him. He ended up having 7 targets, 6 receptions, and let's go to the game log a little bit. 6 receptions, and he didn't score a touchdown. I didn't watch this game, but from what I heard anyways, this probably was due to game script. The Chicago Bears were actually leading for most of this game, and David Montgomery was just torching the Detroit defense on the ground, but they found a way to lose. But anyways, with that positive game script, they didn't really feel the need to throw as much as they have over previous games when they've been down. So ergo, David Montgomery feasted and had a fantastic game, and Allen Robinson had a muted game since they didn't really have to throw as much to him. And that was just shown by the amount of targets. He got 7 targets instead of his requisite 9 to 10 targets in this game. But he didn't. Yeah, he wasn't so bad. 10 points is about his floor, so that's not too bad for him. Going over to the other side though, DK Metcalf, for my opponent, he really disappointed here. He played against the New York Giants, but the Giants, as the year has been going on, their defense has been getting better and better, and they really put down the clamps on the Seattle Seahawks. Man, I got a brain fart off for a second. But they put down the clamps on Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks, and they couldn't really get anything going between him and Chris Carson. I'll get to Chris Carson in a minute. But Tyler Lockett had a bad game. Russell Wilson had a bad game. This ended up being more of a defensive struggle here than them putting up points. So DK Metcalf, that is his floor as well, pretty much 10 points. That isn't too bad most of the time anyways. Let's go over to his second wide receiver. Jarvis Landry is starting to show that he is the number 1 receiver on that team, and not only that he's a fantasy top 20 player, probably top 15 player moving forward. Baker Mayfield is really keying in on him, and he is getting a bunch of targets. See, this last game he got 10 targets and 8 receptions, 62 yards and a touchdown as well. And they hopped out to a huge lead during this game. They were up 38 to, I believe, 3 by halftime. So yeah, Baker Mayfield, he had an awesome game as well. I think he had 4 touchdowns as well and a ton of yards. So they really jumped out ahead of the Tennessee Titans during this game. And Jarvis Landry really took advantage of that as the primary receiver of Baker Mayfield. Going down to our running back core, Nick Chubb, he did pretty well. It was a little disappointing. He had 18 rushes with 80 yards and a touchdown. What was really good about this game, though, is that he really outperformed Kareem Hunt. So it really looks like that Nick Chubb is the alpha, the pure alpha in this backfield. Although I don't believe he caught many passes. Let's take a little peek here. How many receptions did you get? Okay, yeah, he only had 1 target and 1 reception. But this game was a little bit disappointing. A little bit disappointing as far as his numbers. He did pretty well with 17 points, but I really thought he was going to smash here. But I really think this was more due to, game script. They were up big at halftime, but they were up so much that they ended up pulling him early in the 4th quarter. So he did not play the full game since they were up so big. But anyways, he looked good. Nick Chubb looks great, and he will be in our starter position moving forward. I don't think I could sit him for anybody, particularly since we have the bye, thank goodness. because against Baltimore, that's where I would have to consider sitting him. I probably wouldn't sit him, but our expectations would have to be a bit muted against Baltimore. But anyway, so we don't have to play this week against Baltimore, so that's good for us. Against New York, the Giants have been looking better, but I don't feel too bad about New York. And of course, a smash spot against New Jersey. Hopefully, if we make it to Week 16, knock on wood again. Going over to our second running back spot, Chris Carson, he did relatively well, but again, the game script, this was a defensive battle against the New York Giants. He ended up getting 13 rushing attempts with 65 yards, 6 targets and 45 yards, and a receiving touchdown. He actually got most of that yardage with that touchdown run. I believe it was around a 30-yard touchdown run. But if he didn't score that touchdown, then he probably wouldn't have had a great game. This game was, again, a defensive matchup, so it was a little bit disappointing, the amount of points that, actually it wasn't disappointing because he scored the touchdown. But he looked good. Carlos Hyde was banged up and didn't get that much play during this game. Moving forward, I'm not too worried about Chris Carson, especially, this week he would have had the Jets, which, that would have been a cherry matchup. But, during Week 15 against Washington has actually looked pretty good. As the years gone by, their defense has always, throughout the entire year, has looked really good. But their offense is starting to piece it together as well. But against the Washington football team during Week 15, there's a little pause there for us. We'd have to temper our expectations there. And, of course, we'd have to temper our expectations against the Los Angeles Rams for Week 16. Looking over at our opponent's side, Kenyon Drake, he did fairly well. He scored a touchdown. So like we said before, if he wouldn't have scored a touchdown, his points wouldn't have looked good. The thing is, since Kyler Murray has been banged up, his shoulder's banged up, he hasn't been running as much, and he hasn't been running in touchdowns nearly as much over the last few games since he's gotten hurt. So Kenyon Drake is the primary goal line running back now instead of Kyler Murray. So he's getting more of those goal line looks, and so moving forward, he's more likely to score a touchdown moving forward. And he ended up scoring a touchdown here. Good for us, though, he did not have a ton of yardage. And then here, this was a fantasy landmine with my opponent starting Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was active for this game, but they did not use him. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had an illness. From what I've been reading, it was like a flu-like illness, but he ended up losing a ton of weight, and he was only activated he was only active, but they would only play him for emergency purposes only. So Le'Veon Bell pretty much got all the touches during this game with their third running back. I think Williams is their third running back. He got a few touches to spell Bell, but otherwise Clyde Edwards-Helaire got 0 playing time during this game and ended up donutting for the week. That's just tough luck there for my opponent, Rated R Superstar, because he was activated, and we were expecting that maybe he'd have a reduced role, but for him to not even see the field throughout the entire game, nobody expected that. That's just tough luck for our opponent there. But let's go ahead and jump in to our tight end spot, Darren BAAAALLLLLEERRRR, also known as Darren Waller. He had a super good game against the New York Jets. He had 17 targets, 13 receptions, 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He was the primary receiver as per usual for Derek Carr. He lit these guys up hardcore. And you know what? He looked like the only receiving option that was catching passes. Nelson Aguilar, he got a bunch of targets, but he wasn't catching too many of those passes. Some of the throws were bad from Derek Carr. And actually, the Raiders really kind of disappointed. They really lowered the bar. They were playing down to their competition against the New York Jets. And they almost lost this game as well. If not for a really bad defensive play for the last play of the game, because the only way that the Raiders could have won this game, it went all the way down to the last play, and they had to throw a Hail Mary for a touchdown to win. And the New York Jets ended up throwing everybody at Derek Carr. They blitzed. They had no help in the backfield for all of their wide receivers that were back there. And Derek Carr ended up throwing a 50-yard touchdown pass to Henry Ruggs. So, but anyways, Darren Waller's a stud. Man, probably the best trade I made for the entire year was getting Darren Waller. And, ironically, I traded Rated R Superstar, who was then known as Roto-Rooter. If you recall, we traded Jonnu Smith and Matt Ryan for him. Man, that was a fantastic trade. I'm so glad that I made that trade. Going over to the other side, TJ Hockenson did do really well. From what I'm reading anyways, the Detroit Lions, they fired their coach Matt Patricia, and they really opened up that offense. They're really pushing the pace. They are now letting Matthew Stafford cook. So Matthew Stafford has been throwing passes, and a lot of passes. Marvin Jones also had a huge game as well. But anyways, TJ Hockenson did well. He caught a touchdown. He got a bunch of yardage. Yeah, it's just tough luck that our opponent had to face Darren Waller this week. So, but anyways, moving forward, Yong Waiku, the best kicker in football right now. He did not disappoint as well. 10 points. Anytime you get double-digit points from your kicker, that is awesome. And Yong Waiku is awesome here. No disappointments, and he's going to be our starter moving forward. Harrison Butker did do well during this game. The Chiefs, who are they playing again? They were playing Denver. The Chiefs pretty much were well in hand with Denver. They were leading for most of the game. Actually, you know what? I shouldn't say it was well in hand, because it was pretty competitive through most of this game. I should say. Denver actually played surprisingly well. Drew Lock looked like Drew Lock. He's really streaky. Sometimes he looks like he could throw really well, and sometimes he's just throwing right into the dirt or right into the hands of the defense. But Harrison Butker pulled out a really good game this week. Going over to our defense, the Rams did do well against not New England. Who did they play this week? Against Arizona. Arizona's, like I said earlier with Kyler Murray, Arizona's offense is sputtering due to Kyler Murray's injury. He hasn't been playing nearly as well. He hasn't been running. So the Rams took advantage of that. They ended up getting a pick six, so that's why their score is a bit inflated. But we had the Rams to play them. Maybe not this week, but we got the Rams to play them down the stretch, and they have a great matchup during Week 15 against the New York Jets. So yeah, glad they performed really well for us this week. And Vegas actually disappointed a bit. They did rack up a bunch of points here, but I really thought they'd smash the Jets here, but they totally didn't. But it was close enough to their projections that you can't really be mad at that outing for the Las Vegas Raiders. Notable guys on my bench who performed well: Robert Woods, Mr. Reliable. I don't see it. You know what? Why do I keep benching you, Robert Woods, for Allen Robinson? Maybe I should just leave you in my lineup from now on, particularly for the next couple games I need to play him, the New York Jets and the Seattle Seahawks as well. I don't see myself sitting him for those 2 weeks, but we'll make that decision when we get there. Another big thing, Antonio Gibson, man, after his humongous game last week, he ended up getting hurt. He ended up getting turf toe with his second carry of the game this week against Dallas, which, it was a huge smash spot against Pittsburgh. And the Washington football team played really well against Pittsburgh this week. Their offense looked good. They won the game against Pittsburgh this week. But yeah, really tough for Antonio Gibson. From what I'm reading, he's not expected to play this week. Hopefully he'll be ready to play for Week 15 and Week 16, knock on wood, so he will be an option for us then. But with turf toe, it's like you never know. They could be out for a week. They could be out for multiple weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if they put him on IR, to tell the truth, and he'd be done for for the season, at least the fantasy season, if he was put on IR now. But yeah, really tough for Antonio Gibson. Going down the list, Deontay Johnson did do pretty well against the Washington football team. He is the number one read for Ben Roethlisberger and that Pittsburgh offense. He scored a touchdown and racked up, I believe, around 80 or 90 yards. Let's go ahead and take a peek real quick. How many yards did you put up, Mr. Deontay? 70 yards. So 70 yards and a touchdown. You know, yeah, actually looking forward at his matchups. Oh, his matchups look pretty tough. Well, actually, Cincinnati looks really good. But then Indianapolis to finish out the year, that's a pretty tough matchup. Going down the list, Deebo Samuel did pretty well. You know what? This game was well out of hand, though, watching this against Buffalo. Buffalo got out to a big lead, and they're playing catch-up. And actually, Brandon Ayuk was the beneficiary of that game script, since Brandon Ayuk is the outside threat. Mullins was passing to him a lot, and yeah, Ayuk performed really well. Deebo Samuel ended up racking up most of his points during garbage time. But he did end up scoring, I believe. Let's go ahead and take a check. Actually, no, he didn't score. Did he run in? No, he didn't score. But 6 receptions and 73 yards, not bad, and 9 targets as well. That's pretty good as well. Actually, you know what? I totally missed one of my starters. I know I did. Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert totally disappointed, and not only that, but he let's go down his line real quick. He had 9 rush attempts for 42 yards, 1 target for 1 reception, and 1 yard. He did not score a touchdown, but more so than anything, this was really disappointing because he did not get a lot of touches, and Shanahan was really working in all the other running backs here. Tevin Coleman got work. Jeff Wilson got almost the same amount of rushing attempts and more targets through the air. So especially considering how well he did during the last game, or his workload from the last game, because I believe he got 16 rush attempts last week. For him to lose those rush attempts this week, I'm pretty concerned about Raheem Mostert here. I really thought that he was the number one in this backfield, or that he'd be getting more like 60% of the touches and the looks. But from this game, hopefully this was just because of game script, knock on wood. But if this becomes a running back by committee, then yeah, this is really going to hurt Raheem Mostert's value, and I'm going to have to consider whether or not I'm going to start him moving forward. It's going to be, let's look up his matchups real quick. Yeah, he has some cherry matchups too, Dallas and Arizona. Man, but if he's not the number one, then we can't really trust him to start him there. Another last notable is J.K. Dobbins on our bench. He didn't end up scoring a touchdown, but just like Raheem Mostert, man, this week he did not look like he did not get as much work as we expected him to get. He did end up getting 50% of those backfield carries, and the other 2 running backs, Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards, ended up splitting the other 50%. But we were really expecting him to get around 60+% of those looks and those touches, and he didn't here. But you know what? They were up ahead pretty big, or they were in control of this game for most. For most of the game, they were in control, so maybe that had something to do with it. But, I paid a ton of fab to try to keep this guy away from my opponents, and he has some good matchups moving forward. He has a great matchup week 15 in Jacksonville, but I don't know if it's going to be a committee. We'll have to keep close attention during week 14 against Cleveland. If it's going to be a running back by committee, then yeah, that's really going to hurt his numbers as well, and we won't be able to trust him, particularly during the fantasy playoffs. But anyways, that goes over our matchups for this week. Let's go ahead and jump into my standings again. I pulled out the number 1 standings here, but let's go ahead and jump into the playoff bracket real quick. So me and Von Like Donkey Kong get the bye, I should say, since we are the 1 and 2 seeds here. and it's going down, and blue balls are the 4th and 5th seed. And actually, a bit of surprise, Dak in the Box ended up squeezing out. Let's go back to the standings here. She ended up squeezing out a Booyah to reach to get the number 6 seed here. And actually, I didn't even notice that Christian Mingle actually leapfrogged over Booyah for the 7th seed. But anyways, going back to the fantasy playoffs, Dak in the Box versus the drafted in the 2nd bracket. So that's pretty much our situation thus far for the start of the fantasy playoffs. I'll probably be facing the winner of well, actually, you know what? I sent my league to reseed after each bracket. So whoever performs the worst amongst these 4, I should be facing in the semifinal. And I think that pretty much covers everything for this show. Thanks again so much for watching another episode of Vin Plays Yahoo Fantasy Football. My name is Vin. I like to play games, and I'll see you next time.